6 weeks after my dream wedding, my husband still hadn't touched me. When I found a flower receipt with a woman's name and a kiss on it, I thought he was cheating. I had no idea the truth was so much worse. I used to think silence was peaceful. Now it only haunts me. 6 weeks into my marriage, and I had memorized every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the house, except the one sound I longed for, my husband's voice saying, "Come here." Instead, Daniel sat on the edge of our bed with his back to me, elbows on his knees, scrolling his phone like I wasn't even there. The soft cotton of my nightgown brushed against my legs as I stood uncertainly by the doorway. Lavender silk, the one he once said made me look like summer. "I thought we could talk," I offered gently. He didn't turn around. I stepped closer. "Daniel, we're married. Don't you think it's time we—" He cut me off, his voice sharp and glacial. "My body is my own. You don't get to claim it." The air left my lungs. I stood frozen, the warmth in my chest dissolving into ice. "I'm not claiming you. I just want to understand. You don't even look at me anymore." He stood abruptly and faced me, his eyes dark. Not angry, just closed off like I was someone selling him something he didn't want. "We've had this conversation, Nina. Respect my boundaries." Then he walked past me like I wasn't his wife, wasn't anyone, and disappeared into the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. This wasn't what I married. This wasn't the man who brought me coffee every morning when we were dating. The one who held my hand in the park, who used to lean in just to whisper he missed me, even when I was right next to him. The honeymoon had been our first warning. Every night, he was too tired, too distracted. I had chalked it up to stress, to jet lag, to awkwardness. But it never changed. If anything, it got worse. Now I realized something chilling. This wasn't marriage fatigue. It was avoidance. Calculated, practiced, polite, but chilling. And suddenly, in the cold echo of our bedroom, I understood something I hadn't dared admit until now. The man I married might not be who he says he is. I hadn't seen my brother in over a year, but when I told Daniel I was planning a weekend in Seattle, his response wasn't disappointment. It was relief. "That sounds good," he said without looking up from his phone. "You should go. Might do you some good." Something in his voice felt off. Not supportive, eager. I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "You won't miss me?" Daniel offered a shrug, followed by the faintest smile. "I'll survive." It wasn't the answer that bothered me. It was the ease with which he gave it. The man who once hated being apart for even a day now couldn't pack me off fast enough. That night, while pulling out my weekend bag from the top of the closet, one of Daniel's jackets slipped off the hanger and crumpled to the floor. As I lifted it, something crinkled in the inside pocket. A folded receipt. At first, I thought nothing of it, until I read the address. Rose and Bloom, Las Vegas, Nevada. Date, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. He told me he was in Chicago for a client meeting. I flipped the slip over. In Daniel's handwriting. Mira Kissmark, 702-555. I stare at the page, trying to breathe. A flower shop. A woman's name. A kiss mark. A phone number. Las Vegas, not Chicago. Suddenly, my husband's obsession with privacy, the secrecy around his work, the locked phone, the late nights, the cold distance, it all snapped into focus. Was Mira his mistress? Or something worse? I dropped the receipt into my purse, my fingers trembling. I wasn't sure what I had just discovered, but I knew one thing for certain. Daniel was lying to me, and I wasn't leaving for Seattle to visit my brother anymore. I was leaving to start investigating the man sleeping in my bed. Henry Alvarez looked nothing like the detectives on TV. No trench coat, no cigarette. Just a clean-shaven man in his 50s with tired eyes and a quiet voice that somehow made me feel safer. "Let's start with what you already know," he said gently, a pen poised above his notebook. I slid the receipt across the table. He told me he was in Chicago. This says otherwise. Henry nodded once. "We'll find out the rest." Within a week, I had more answers than I wanted. Daniel Reed, my husband, had never worked for the firm he claimed. Henry called their front desk, posed as a recruiter. They'd never heard of him. His LinkedIn profile? A shell. Stock images. Vague references. A fabricated trail of consulting work that led nowhere. And then came the photos. Henry tailed Daniel on a Wednesday. He had told me he'd be in meetings all day and caught him in a small town 2 hours for Portland. Not in a suit. Not a conference. He was sitting outside a cafe. With her. A woman, late 30s, dark auburn hair, striking smile, laughing as Daniel leaned in, his hand resting on hers like it belonged there. The camera had caught the exact angle of his face, the same face that wouldn't even look at me when I spoke. When I got home that night, I waited until he fell asleep. His phone, left charging on a nightstand, still used the same passcode, our wedding date. The screen unlocked. My heart pounded. The message app was full of chats with Mira. Just a little longer, love. She's nearly ready to file. The prenup will hold. Once it's done, we'll move forward. I stared at the words, unable to breathe. Not only was Daniel lying, he was planning. Plotting something. With someone else. With Mira. But for what? Was this about money? Identity theft? Control? Whatever it was, I knew now. This wasn't a husband with a secret. It was a stranger with a strategy. And I was the target. I found her, Henry said, sliding a manila folder across the cafe table. His voice was low but steady. Her real name is Miranda Reed. I blinked. Reed? As in Daniel Reed? He gave a grim nod. She's not his mistress. She's his sister. The words didn't compute at first. My mind tried to reject them, like a puzzle piece that couldn't possibly fit. They, I stammered. But the text, the tone, they sounded like lovers. They want people to think that, Henry said. It's part of their cover. Makes the operation harder to trace. I opened the folder. Inside, surveillance photos, DMV records, financial reports, and most damning of all, marriage certificates. Daniel had done this before. For other women in different states. Same pattern. Whirlwind courtship, quick wedding, sudden coldness. And then, when the women gave up and filed for divorce, he would strike. Only now did the prenup make sense. Daniel had insisted on it, said it would protect us both. I'd signed it in the haze of wedding planning, trusting him. But Henry had gone through it line by line with a legal expert. If you file within the first year, he explained, Daniel is entitled to half of any assets you brought into the marriage. That included the trust fund my grandmother left me. It was a setup from the start. Miranda handled the paperwork. Fake jobs, false references, even legal forms. Daniel played the devoted fiancé. Together, they perfected the con. You weren't the first, Henry said, but you could be the last. Because now we have enough to nail both of them. I felt sick, but underneath that nausea, something harder was taking shape. Not anger, not even revenge. Determination. They want me to file for divorce, I said slowly. Henry smiled faintly. Then let's give them exactly what they want. The Denver courthouse smelled of stale coffee and floor polish, but I walked in with my head high and my heart steady. I was filing for divorce. I played my role perfectly. The heartbroken wife who just couldn't make it work. Daniel had no reason to suspect I knew everything. He gave me a sympathetic smile and even squeezed my hand like I was some fragile thing falling apart. Inside, I was steel. We waited. Detective Alvarez and 2 federal agents had already placed surveillance around the bank where Daniel had been setting up fraudulent accounts using my name and our marriage certificate. The forged documents Miranda had prepared were flawless. Almost. But not flawless enough. The morning after the papers were filed, Daniel made his move. He entered the bank with a calm, confident gait, handed over the papers, and requested access to his share of my trust. He didn't know the bank manager was working with us. Within minutes, the agents were on him. Miranda, waiting outside in a rented car, never saw them coming. By the time I got the call, it's done. Both in custody. I was sitting on my front porch, watching the wind twist through the autumn leaves. The trial was swift. Daniel was charged with marriage fraud, bigamy, wire fraud, and identity theft. Miranda, his sister and co-conspirator, faced charges of aiding and abetting, document forgery, and financial fraud. Both pleaded not guilty. Both were found guilty. Daniel received a 12-year federal sentence. Miranda got 8. Their operation unraveled completely when other women, victims like me, stepped forward, finally unafraid to speak. Their empire of lies collapsed. But I didn't. I rebuilt. I moved to a smaller place. I went back to work. I surrounded myself with people who didn't make me question my own worth. And one afternoon, standing in the same room where I once felt invisible, I looked at myself in the mirror and said the words out loud. I won, not because I destroyed them, but because they didn't destroy me. If something feels wrong, don't stay quiet. Investigate. Protect yourself. And don't be afraid to fight back. You're worth the truth. Was worded ton when and Justein's Lage Ward. Glot man kan mention werklich kennen, til gedanken unten in den Kommentaren. Relesen MIT. A Bonnier unseren Kanal für weiter Ward Geschichten, die UNS alle etwas lehren.